Stop acting like a victim, Juniper. My mother's voice echoed across the conference room just seconds before the orthopedic surgeon reached over and switched on the light board. Why was my own family more determined to question my pain than the doctors treating me? Why had my brother looked so confident walking into that meeting? And why did the scan glowing behind the doctor make everyone suddenly stop talking? Dr. Emily Chen didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed to my MRI and said, "These injuries could not have come from the accident described in your medical file." That was the moment I realized my family hadn't just doubted me. Someone had buried the truth for nearly a year. If you're listening from somewhere in the world today, tell me your country in the comments. I'd also love to know what time it is where you are right now, and if stories about truth resilience and finding the courage to set healthy boundaries speak to you. Consider subscribing so you won't miss what happened next. A year before that meeting at Charlotte Regional Medical Center, my life was remarkably ordinary. I was 36 years old and served as the senior physical therapist and clinical director at a rehabilitation center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Every day I helped people recover from strokes, spinal injuries, joint replacements, and devastating accidents that had turned simple tasks into impossible ones. My patients often joked that I had endless patience. I smiled easily, listened carefully, and celebrated every tiny victory with them, whether it was taking 3 steps without assistance or finally buttoning a shirt after months of therapy. I understood pain because I spent my career helping people live with it. What I didn't understand, at least not yet, was how easily emotional pain could disguise itself as love. Growing up, my family never treated me badly in ways that outsiders would immediately recognize. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic disownments, no obvious cruelty. Instead, there was always one quiet expectation. Marcus came first. If Marcus needed help paying tuition, everyone contributed. If Marcus wanted to launch his construction company, my parents refinanced part of their retirement savings to help him. If Marcus made mistakes, someone always found an explanation. He just needs another chance. Running a business is stressful. You know your brother has so much pressure. Whenever I accomplished something, my parents were proud. Whenever Marcus struggled, the entire family mobilized. It wasn't malicious. At least I never believed it was. It simply became the rhythm of our family. I learned early that independence earned compliments while dependence earned attention. So I became independent. After graduate school, I built my own career without asking anyone for financial help. I bought a comfortable condominium outside downtown Charlotte. My savings were healthy. I loved my work. I wasn't wealthy, but I had created a life that felt stable. Marcus, meanwhile, owned Washington Commercial Builders. His company specialized in office renovations, schools, and medical facilities. Business had been strong for years, but construction had slowed recently. Material costs kept rising. Several commercial projects were behind schedule. Whenever we met for dinner, Marcus looked more tired than I remembered. "I'll get through it," he always said with a confident smile, and somehow I always believed him. One Friday afternoon, Marcus called while I was finishing patient notes. "Hey, June." He was one of the few people who still called me that. "You busy tomorrow?" "I've got a few hours free." "I could really use your opinion." "My professional opinion or my sister opinion?" He laughed. "Both." The following morning, I drove to one of his largest renovation projects, a 4-story office building being converted into a medical complex. The irony still isn't lost on me. Marcus greeted me with a hard hat already waiting. "There she is." He hugged me tightly. "You've lost weight," I said. "I've lost sleep." He laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. As we walked through the building, he explained the project. "We're trying to make everything fully ADA compliant before final inspection. Since you spend your life helping patients, I figured you'd notice things my architects won't." That request made perfect sense. I had consulted on rehabilitation spaces before. I knew how patients with walkers, wheelchairs, or limited mobility experienced buildings differently from architects. For nearly an hour, I pointed out doorway clearances, handrail placement ramp angles, and therapy room layouts. Marcus listened carefully and took notes. It felt good, natural, like siblings working together. As we reached the third floor, something caught my attention. A temporary elevated platform overlooked the future physical therapy gym. Several construction workers stood nearby. None of them looked relaxed. One man glanced toward Marcus, then quickly looked away. Another quietly said something I couldn't hear. The oldest worker approached Marcus. "We still haven't finished reinstalling the safety barriers," Marcus answered without lowering his voice. "We're only walking across for 2 minutes." The worker hesitated. "I don't think it'll be fine." His tone wasn't angry. It was impatient. The worker nodded reluctantly and stepped aside. I stopped walking. "Marcus," he turned. "Is something wrong?" "I thought he said the barriers weren't finished." Marcus smiled. "They're talking about permanent guardrails. Temporary supports are underneath." He tapped one of the steel beams with his boot. "Trust me." I wish those 2 words didn't still echo inside my head. Trust me. I looked across the platform. Nothing appeared unusual. Construction sites always looked unfinished. Dust covered every surface, power tools hummed somewhere below. Workers carried bundles of wiring through unfinished hallways. I had absolutely no reason to think those few steps would change my life. Marcus walked first. I followed. Halfway across, I felt something shift beneath my feet. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just a strange vibration. Then came a sharp metallic crack. The platform lurched sideways. Someone screamed. The floor disappeared beneath me. I remember reaching instinctively for the nearest railing. There wasn't one. For a split second, I saw Marcus turning around with absolute shock on his face. Then gravity took over. I crashed onto unfinished concrete below. The impact knocked every bit of air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. An unbearable pain exploded through my lower back before spreading into my hips and legs. Above me, voices blurred together. "Call 911. Don't move her!" Oh my God. Marcus was suddenly beside me. His face had turned completely white. "June, stay with me." I tried answering. Nothing came out except a shallow gasp. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics secured my neck, stabilized my spine, and carefully lifted me onto a backboard. Every tiny movement felt like electricity shooting through my body. Inside the ambulance, one paramedic asked where the pain was. "My back." "Can you move your feet?" I tried. Barely. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner. No one explained what that look meant. At Charlotte Regional Medical Center, doctors ordered X-rays, CT scans, and an MRI while I drifted in and out under heavy pain medication. Hours later, I woke to find my parents standing beside my bed. Lorraine immediately squeezed my hand. "Oh, sweetheart." Her eyes were red from crying. Marcus stood silently in the corner. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I should have checked everything myself." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. The next morning before I was discharged, a man wearing a business casual shirt introduced himself as someone helping coordinate the company's insurance paperwork. Most of the conversation passed in a medication-induced haze. He placed several forms on a clipboard. Marcus leaned closer. "This is just routine, so insurance covers everything." I remember trying to focus on the pages. The words blurred together. "I don't think I can read this right now." "You don't need to," Marcus said gently. "It's standard authorization." Before I could answer, my mother spoke from the chair beside the window. "Juniper, please don't let this become a lawsuit." I looked at her confused. "What?" "It was an accident." She glanced toward Marcus before continuing. "If lawyers get involved, his company could collapse." My father finally spoke. "We'll make sure you're taken care of." Marcus nodded immediately. "I'll cover whatever insurance doesn't." Lorraine squeezed my hand again. "We're family." Still exhausted and overwhelmed, I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe every word they were saying. I wanted to believe my family would protect me the way I had always believed they would. 3 weeks later, while organizing the discharge paperwork on my dining room table, one document caught my attention. An insurance authorization form. At the bottom was a signature. My name. Except I couldn't remember signing it. And the more I stared at it, the less it looked like my handwriting. For the first month after the accident, I measured my progress the same way I measured it for my own patients. Could I get out of bed without help? Could I stand long enough to brush my teeth? Could I walk to the mailbox? Could I make it through a shower without sitting down halfway? Recovery wasn't supposed to be glamorous. I knew that better than most people. I also knew it wasn't supposed to move backward. By week 6, I should have been noticing steady improvements. Instead, every morning felt worse than the one before. The pain no longer stayed in my lower back. It wrapped around my hips, shot down my left leg, and sometimes left my foot tingling for hours. On bad days, my left knee buckled without warning. As a physical therapist, those symptoms terrified me. As a sister, I kept telling myself I was simply impatient. Marcus called every few days. "How are you feeling today?" "I've had better mornings." "You'll get there." "I hope so." "We're all rooting for you." He always sounded sincere. That made everything much harder later. When I returned to work on limited duty, my staff welcomed me with flowers, balloons, and enough homemade food to feed a neighborhood. "You don't have to rush back," one therapist said. I was going crazy sitting at home. "You realize you're the worst patient in this building?" I laughed. "I know." For the first few weeks, I handled evaluations, paperwork, and treatment planning while other therapists performed the physically demanding sessions. I hated feeling useless. One afternoon, I watched one of my younger therapists help a patient stand after spinal surgery. Without thinking, I stepped forward to demonstrate a transfer technique. The moment I bent at the waist, a bolt of pain ripped through my back. I grabbed the treatment table before I collapsed. "Juniper." My colleague Angela Morris hurried toward me. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Just moved too fast." She didn't look convinced. Angela had worked beside me for nearly 8 years. She knew exactly how I carried myself when I was hurting. Later that afternoon, she knocked on my office door. "You've got a minute." "Always." She closed the door behind her. "I'm asking this as your friend, not your coworker." I nodded. "Your symptoms." She hesitated. "They don't match the recovery timeline we've been told." I leaned back. "What do you mean? You've described increasing numbness." "Yes." "Weakness." "Sometimes." "Burning pain." "Almost every day." She folded her arms. "Juniper, that's not the pattern I'd expect if your injuries were as minor as your discharge summary says." Her words lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. I had noticed the same thing. I'd simply been too afraid to admit it. That night, I opened every medical document I had received since leaving the hospital: emergency discharge instructions, prescription list, physical therapy referral, follow-up recommendations. Everything described my injuries almost casually: lumbar strain, soft tissue trauma, expected gradual improvement, continue conservative treatment. Nothing about spinal instability, nothing about surgical consultation, nothing about permanent nerve damage. I stared at the papers until nearly midnight. Something didn't feel right. Still, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Doctors weren't perfect. Medical language could be confusing. Maybe I simply wasn't interpreting everything correctly. The following Sunday, my parents invited everyone over for dinner. Normally, family dinners meant grilled chicken, too much sweet tea, and my father trying unsuccessfully to keep conversations away from politics. This dinner felt different before I even walked through the door. Marcus was already there. Lorraine greeted me with a hug. "You look much better." "I don't really feel better." She smiled anyway. "You just have to stop focusing on every ache." I didn't answer. Halfway through dinner, my aunt mentioned she'd heard I was still only working part-time. Lorraine sighed dramatically. She's having a hard time letting herself heal. I looked up. "What does that mean?" "Honey, sometimes people become trapped in the identity of being injured." The table became strangely quiet. "I don't think that's what's happening." Marcus set down his fork. "Mom's just saying stress can make pain worse." "I know stress affects pain. I'm agreeing with you. It doesn't feel like it." Lorraine reached across the table. "Juniper's sweetheart." Her voice softened into the same tone she'd used since I was a child. "You've always been so strong." "I've tried." "Exactly." She smiled as if she'd solved something. "So stop convincing yourself you're broken." No one said anything for several seconds. Finally, my cousin changed the subject. But the damage had already been done. Driving home, I kept replaying the conversation. "Stop convincing yourself you're broken." Was I? The logical part of my brain rejected that idea immediately. Pain wasn't imaginary. Neurological symptoms weren't personality traits. They either existed or they didn't. Still, when enough people tell you the same story, part of you begins wondering whether you've somehow misunderstood your own reality. That frightened me more than the injury itself. Over the next 2 months, my condition deteriorated. I canceled weekend plans because standing too long became exhausting. Simple grocery trips required leaning on the shopping cart. Driving more than 30 minutes left my leg numb. Patients noticed. Co-workers noticed. Even strangers noticed. Only my family insisted I was improving. One afternoon, Angela stopped by my office again. She placed a thick folder on my desk. "What's this?" "My husband's workers' compensation case." I looked at her confused. He requested every original medical record himself. "I already have mine." She shook her head. "No." "You have what people sent you." She tapped the folder. "Those aren't always the same thing." I frowned. "What are you saying?" When David's case was settled, we discovered 3 reports we'd never received. "How?" "The insurance company only forwarded summary documents." I stared at her. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." She pulled out a yellow sticky note. "Request everything." "What does everything mean?" She began counting on her fingers. "Every physician note." "Okay. Every radiology report." I nodded. "Every scan." "What else?" "The images themselves." "I can get those?" "Absolutely." She leaned closer. "And don't ask through the insurance company." "Why not?" "Ask the hospital directly." For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than confusion. Curiosity. That evening, I submitted formal requests to Charlotte Regional Medical Center and the independent imaging center that had performed my MRI. I requested every document, every physician note, every radiology interpretation, every scan, every timestamp, every electronic record connected to my treatment. 5 days later, I received a call from the imaging center. "Ms. Washington, this is Juniper. This is Melissa in medical records. I'm calling about your request." "Yes." There was a brief pause. "We've located nearly everything." "Nearly. There appears to be one issue. My stomach tightened. What kind of issue? It looks like one of your scheduled follow-up MRI appointments was canceled. I never canceled an MRI. I understand. She sounded careful now. Our records show the cancellation wasn't made by you. My grip tightened around the phone. Then who canceled it? I'm afraid I can't answer that over the phone. Why not? Because the request came through an authorized insurance representative. Silence filled my apartment. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Can you tell me whose insurance representative? Another pause. When you come in tomorrow to collect your records, she said quietly, I think you'll want to see the authorization history for yourself. I barely slept that night. As a healthcare professional, I understood medical records well enough to know they weren't just paperwork. Every note, every scan, every electronic timestamp told the story of a patient's care. If someone had interfered with that story, there would almost always be a trail. The question was whether anyone had expected me to look for it. I arrived at the imaging center the next morning, 15 minutes before it opened. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. You must be Ms. Washington. I am. Melissa is expecting you. She led me down a quiet hallway to the medical records department where shelves of neatly organized files lined the walls. Although most records were digital now the department still handled requests that required verification and image transfers. A woman in her early 50s stood as I entered. I'm Melissa Harper. We shook hands. I reviewed your request personally. I appreciate that. She gestured toward a chair. Please sit. Within moments, she placed a thick folder on the conference table. Beside it sat a sealed envelope containing a DVD and a secure flash drive. These contain every MRI and CT image we have on file. I looked down at the stack. It was much thicker than the paperwork sitting in the folder cabinet at home. Melissa noticed. I'm guessing you've never seen most of these. No. You aren't the first patient who's been surprised. She opened the folder. This section contains your imaging reports. She turned several pages until one report stopped her. This is your first MRI. The date matched the evening of my accident. I scanned the page. Medical terminology filled nearly every line. Disc protrusion, ligament disruption, nerve root compression, spinal instability. Even with my professional background, the report was intimidating. Melissa looked at me kindly. Would you like me to explain what you're reading? Please. She pointed to the first highlighted paragraph. The radiologist documented significant structural damage. I swallowed. Significant, yes. She moved her finger farther down. This isn't describing a routine back strain. I felt my pulse quicken. She continued. The MRI suggested that your spine had become unstable after the fall. I looked up. My discharge papers never mentioned that. No. They said soft tissue injury. Melissa nodded slowly. I noticed that. She pulled another document from the folder. This was attached to the MRI. I had never seen it before. Across the top were the words, orthopedic spine consultation recommendation. Below that, one sentence had been highlighted. Urgent surgical evaluation recommended within 14 days due to progressive neurological risk. I read it again, then again. 14 days. My surgery had never happened. No one had even discussed it with me. I stared at Melissa. There has to be some mistake. I don't believe there is. My doctors would have told me. She hesitated. Someone should have. I suddenly couldn't hear the quiet office around me. It felt as though every sound had disappeared. For nearly a year, I had blamed myself. I had questioned my own pain. I had wondered whether I simply wasn't trying hard enough. All because the most important recommendation had never reached me. Melissa carefully slid another document across the table. This is the transmission history. I frowned. What does that mean? It records where copies of reports were sent. She pointed at the screen attached to her workstation. Every imaging report generates a digital distribution log. Rows of dates and timestamps filled the monitor. Hospital, referring physician, insurance case manager, patient mailing address. Everything appeared routine until Melissa highlighted 2 entries. See these? I leaned closer. The original MRI report had been sent electronically the morning after my accident. 3 days later, another transmission appeared. Then another. Then another. Each one labeled updated patient copy. Why are there multiple patient copies? Melissa answered carefully. Sometimes corrections are made. Were there corrections? No. I looked back at the timestamps. Then why? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened another PDF. This version looked shorter, much shorter. The paragraph recommending urgent surgical evaluation was gone. The description of spinal instability, gone. Several references to neurological compression, either shortened or rewritten. I blinked. This isn't the same report. No. It has the same date. Yes. But it doesn't say the same thing. It doesn't. A chill ran through me. Which one did I receive? Melissa met my eyes. Based on the mailing history, she turned the monitor toward me. It appears the revised version. I couldn't speak. Who had revised it? Why, for whose benefit? Melissa quietly folded her hands. I can't answer those questions. But I can show you something else. She opened another screen labeled Authorization History. Every request involving my imaging records had been logged. Most were routine. Hospital physician, treating specialist, insurance adjuster. Then one name appeared over and over. Authorized record redirection request, submitted on behalf of Washington Commercial Builders Insurance Administration. My heart sank. Marcus's company. I leaned closer. Does this mean my brother requested these? Melissa shook her head. Not necessarily. It only tells us the requests originated through the company's insurance administrator. So anyone there could have submitted them. Potentially. I let out a slow breath. Part of me wanted desperately to believe that. Maybe an insurance employee had made terrible decisions without Marcus knowing. Maybe bureaucracy had failed. Maybe no one in my family had intentionally hidden anything. Melissa reached into the folder one last time. I almost forgot. She handed me a sealed envelope. What's this? It arrived with the imaging archive. There wasn't room in the electronic file. She smiled sadly. It isn't an imaging record. I opened the envelope. Inside was another document. Across the top appeared the logo of Charlotte Regional Medical Center. Consultation Scheduling Department. The letter confirmed that an appointment with an orthopedic spine surgeon had been scheduled for me 12 days after my accident. Appointment status canceled, reason patient unavailable. Authorization request received. I looked up so quickly my chair scraped across the floor. I never canceled this. I believe you. I didn't even know it existed. Melissa nodded. The system shows the cancellation occurred 2 days after your discharge. I stared at the final line. Authorized by representative on active insurance claim. No personal name. Just an identification number. I need to know who used that ID. Melissa took a careful breath. I'm afraid we don't have access to that information. Who does? The hospital's compliance office. She wrote a name on the corner of my folder. Daniel Ross, Director of Compliance. He oversees audit requests involving patient records. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. Before leaving, I looked once more at the original MRI images displayed on Melissa's monitor. dark shadows, bright lines, shapes that meant little to most people. To me, they now represented something much larger than an injury. They represented months of stolen choices. Had I known the truth, I could have sought another surgeon, requested another opinion, scheduled surgery immediately, protected my future. Instead, someone had quietly decided what I deserved to know. As I walked toward the parking lot carrying the heavy box of records, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom." "Marcus wants everyone to come over Sunday." "I'm not sure." "You've been distant lately." "I've been busy." She laughed softly. "You've always worked too hard." I glanced at the box sitting on the passenger seat. There was a long pause before I answered. "Mom." "Yes." "Did anyone ever tell you I was supposed to meet with a spine surgeon 2 weeks after my accident?" Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. Finally, she spoke. "I think you're digging into things that aren't going to help you heal." The line went quiet again. Then she added gently, "Sometimes, knowing less is kinder." She hung up before I could ask another question. I sat in my car for nearly 5 minutes staring at my phone. For the first time since the accident, I stopped wondering whether something had gone wrong. I knew it had. The only question left was who had decided I wasn't supposed to know the truth. I called Daniel Ross the next morning. His assistant transferred me almost immediately. "Mr. Ross speaking." "My name is Dr. Juniper Washington." There was a brief pause. "I believe you're calling about an audit request." The statement caught me off guard. "You were expecting me—" "Not exactly." His voice remained calm, but medical records informed me you had questions about several authorization entries. "I have much more than questions." I assumed you might." He offered me an appointment that afternoon. By 2 o'clock, I was sitting across from him inside the hospital's compliance office. Unlike the busy clinical floors downstairs, everything here felt quiet and methodical. Glass walls surrounded conference rooms filled with binders, computer monitors, and secure filing cabinets. Daniel looked to be in his late 50s, measured, professional, the kind of person who chose every word carefully. He closed the conference room door before speaking. "Dr. Washington, before we begin, I need to explain something." I nodded. "My responsibility is to investigate whether hospital policies or patient rights were violated." "I understand." "I can't accuse anyone without evidence." "I'm not asking you to." He folded his hands. "I'm only interested in facts." "So am I." That was the first time in months I felt someone was speaking my language. He connected his laptop to a monitor. "Let's start with the authorization history." Rows of electronic records appeared. Each entry showed a date, time, user ID, department, and action performed. Daniel enlarged one section. "This was your original MRI." I recognized the timestamp immediately. "The morning after my accident." "Correct." He clicked again. "This entry shows the report being released to your treating physician." Everything appeared normal. Another click. "This one released it to the insurance administrator handling the construction site claim." Again. Normal. Then came another entry. Daniel stopped scrolling. "This one deserves attention." The description read, "Patient communication preference updated requested by authorized claim representative." "What's that mean?" I asked. "It changes where future medical information is sent." "I never requested that." "I know." "You know." Daniel looked at me. "The request wasn't submitted from your patient portal." My heartbeat quickened. "Then where—" "It originated from an external insurance account." "Could they legally do that?" "Only if they possessed proper authorization." I reached into my folder. "I've brought every form I received." He examined them carefully. one after another. Finally, he stopped. "This signature," he looked back at me. "Is this yours?" "No." "You've never signed this document." "I don't believe I have." Daniel scanned the page into his computer. Within seconds, another version appeared beside it. I frowned. "Those aren't identical." "They're supposed to be." He enlarged both signatures. The first resembled my handwriting. The second looked almost right. Close enough that most people would never question it. But I signed hundreds of patient documents every week. I knew my own handwriting, the loop in the J, the angle of the W, the pressure marks. Tiny details most people never noticed. "I didn't write that." Daniel quietly nodded. I was beginning to suspect that. He clicked another screen. "This hospital records every electronic upload." A timeline appeared. Original authorization received. Replacement authorization uploaded. Original archived. Replacement activated. I leaned closer. "The original existed." "Yes." "Can you open it?" "I can." He hesitated only long enough to verify my identity again. The original authorization appeared. I almost laughed from disbelief. The document was nearly blank. It authorized only billing communication. Nothing else. No medical redirection, no appointment cancellations, no report modifications. Nothing. Daniel opened the second version. Additional paragraphs had somehow appeared. They granted permission to communicate through the insurance administrator, permission to redirect correspondence, permission to coordinate specialist scheduling, permission to receive updates. I stared at both documents. Someone expanded the authorization. "That appears possible." "How?" "I don't know yet." He turned his monitor slightly. "But now we have a reason to investigate." For the next hour, Daniel explained something I had never fully appreciated. Hospitals maintained enormous audit systems. Every access, every edit, every upload, every download. Someone always left a digital footprint. The problem wasn't finding footprints. The problem was determining whether they reflected intentional misconduct or administrative error. As we reviewed the logs together, another name repeatedly appeared. Rebecca Ellis. Insurance investigator. Daniel looked up. "I'd like to invite her into this review." "Why?" "Because these requests originated through an insurance claim." "She works for Marcus's insurance carrier, eh?" "No." He smiled slightly. "She investigates suspicious claims." That surprised me. I thought investigators worked for insurance companies. "They do. They're looking for fraud." "Exactly." The following afternoon, Rebecca joined us. She introduced herself with a firm handshake. "I've reviewed the preliminary file, and..." She opened a notebook already filled with handwritten notes. "Something doesn't make sense." "I've been saying that for months." "I know." She smiled sympathetically. "But now we can explain why." She laid 3 documents across the table. "The first is your company's injury claim. The second is the hospital communication history. The third is the insurance correspondence." I compared the dates. They lined up almost perfectly. Then Rebecca circled one date. "Look here. 3 days after my accident." "What happened?" "The insurance reserve changed." "I'm sorry," she explained patiently. When someone suffers a serious spinal injury, insurance companies immediately estimate how expensive the case might become. Higher injury means higher reserve. "Correct." "What happened here?" She pointed again. "The reserve dropped dramatically." "Why?" "Because the diagnosis submitted to the carrier became much less severe." I slowly looked up. "So, if the insurer believed your injuries were relatively minor, the company faced much less financial exposure." Rebecca nodded. "Exactly." Silence settled over the room. Daniel broke it. That doesn't automatically prove wrongdoing. No, Rebecca agreed, but it explains why someone benefited. She continued reviewing emails obtained during the investigation. Most were routine, scheduling, billing, medical updates. Then she opened one that immediately caught my attention. Subject-patient communication adjustment. The sender's address belonged to Washington Commercial Builders. The recipient was the insurance administrator. The message itself was surprisingly short. Please make sure future communication stays coordinated through claim management until this case is stabilized. No name, no signature, only an automated company footer. Rebecca looked at me. This email alone proves very little. But combined with everything else, it becomes important. I felt hope for the first time. Not because I wanted anyone punished, because reality finally had evidence. For months I'd questioned myself, wondered whether stress had clouded my judgment, wondered whether my family was right. Now every document seemed to point in the same direction. Someone had systematically reduced my access to my own medical information. The only remaining question was whether Marcus knew. That evening I drove to my parents' house, not to accuse anyone, not yet. I needed to hear Marcus explain things before drawing conclusions. He answered the front door with his usual smile. June, can we talk? Of course. We sat alone in the den. I placed copies of 2 authorization forms on the coffee table. Marcus looked down. What are these? My medical authorizations. He barely glanced at them. So, one is original. The other isn't. He leaned back. I don't know anything about hospital paperwork. I didn't ask about hospital paperwork. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. I asked whether you've ever seen these. He shook his head. No. I watched him carefully. Years of working with patients had taught me to observe much more than words. People often answered questions with their mouths. Their bodies answered first. Marcus reached for his glass of water. His hand trembled, only slightly. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen for less than a second. But it was enough. The notification banner displayed one name, Rebecca Ellis. Insurance investigation. Marcus immediately locked the screen. Too quickly, far too quickly. I said nothing. Neither did he. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't looking at my older brother. I was looking at someone who already knew an investigation had reached him. I didn't confront Marcus about the notification. Not because I was afraid, because I finally understood something that had taken me nearly a year to learn. People rarely reveal the truth when they're cornered. They reveal it when they believe they still control the conversation. So I stood up, gathered the copies of my documents, and smiled. I appreciate your time. Marcus looked almost relieved. That's it. For now. He walked me to the front door. June? I stopped. I know this has been difficult. I nodded. It has. I never wanted you to think I wasn't on your side. There it was again, not a denial, not an explanation. Just another carefully chosen sentence that avoided the one thing I actually needed to hear. I drove home without turning on the radio. My mind replayed the notification on his phone over and over. Rebecca Ellis. Insurance investigation. If Marcus had nothing to hide, why hadn't he simply said, the insurance investigator contacted me today? Instead, he'd hidden the screen before I could read another word. That tiny movement bothered me more than any dramatic confrontation could have. The next morning, Melissa Carter called. Good news. I could use some. The court approved preservation of additional evidence. What does that mean? It means Washington Commercial Builders can no longer delete or destroy records connected to your accident. I let out a slow breath. Anything else? Yes. Her voice became noticeably more serious. We recovered surveillance footage. I sat upright in my chair. From the construction site, not all of it, but enough. When can I see it? This afternoon. Melissa's office conference room contained a large television mounted on one wall. Rebecca Ellis was already there. So was Daniel Ross. Melissa dimmed the lights. What you're about to see hasn't been edited. The recording began. A timestamp appeared in the upper corner. 8:17 a.m. The camera overlooked the third floor where Marcus had taken me that morning. Workers carried lumber. Someone operated a lift. Nothing unusual. Then one employee walked toward the temporary platform carrying several metal guardrails. Another worker followed. Before either man reached the platform, Marcus entered the frame. Even without sound, I could recognize his posture. He spoke briefly. The workers stopped. One pointed toward the platform. Marcus shook his head. The workers exchanged uncertain looks. Then something happened that made every person in the room lean forward. Instead of installing the guardrails, the workers carried them away. I stared at the screen. No, Melissa paused the video. You noticed it. They were about to install them. Yes, Rebecca nodded. Keep watching. The recording resumed. For nearly 20 minutes, employees continued working elsewhere. At 8:46 a.m., another man approached Marcus carrying a clipboard. They appeared to argue. Again, there was no audio. The employee pointed toward the exposed platform. Marcus looked at his watch, then toward the parking lot. Rebecca froze the frame. This man has already provided a sworn statement. She handed me several pages. I began reading. I warned Mr. Washington that temporary barriers had not been reinstalled after material delivery. I recommended delaying the walkthrough. Mr. Washington responded that investors would arrive shortly and there wasn't enough time. My chest tightened. I looked back at the television. So he knew. Melissa answered carefully. He knew the barriers hadn't been replaced. Does he admit that? No. But this employee does. She handed me another statement. A second foreman. Same story. Different wording. Both men remembered expressing concerns before my arrival. Rebecca spoke quietly. We interviewed 7 employees. How many remembered the warnings? 5. I closed my eyes for a moment. 5 people. 5 opportunities for Marcus to stop everything. 5 chances to tell me to wait. Instead, he'd smiled. Trust me. Melissa restarted the video. At 9:02 a.m., my car entered the parking lot. I watched myself climb out carrying a notebook. I looked relaxed, happy even. Seeing that version of myself hurt more than I expected. She had absolutely no idea what the next hour would cost. The footage followed us through several cameras. Marcus greeted me with a hug. We laughed about something. He handed me a hard hat. We toured the building exactly as I remembered. Then came the moment. The worker approached us. Even from a distance, I recognized him immediately. He gestured toward the unfinished platform. Marcus answered. The worker hesitated. Marcus spoke again. Finally, the worker stepped aside. My stomach turned. I remember that. Rebecca looked at me. You told us. I didn't realize. How uncomfortable he looked. When you're living a moment, you notice only pieces of it. Watching it afterward is different. Now I saw every expression, every reluctant step, every worried glance between workers, everything I had missed because I trusted my brother. The footage continued. Marcus stepped onto the platform. Then I followed. 3 seconds later, the platform shifted. A loud vibration echoed through the room. Even without perfect audio, the metallic snap was unmistakable. The structure collapsed beneath me. Melissa immediately paused the recording. No one spoke. I didn't need to watch myself fall again. I'd lived it once. That was enough. After several minutes, Rebecca broke the silence. We also obtained OSHA inspection records. She slid another folder toward me. The investigation had begun days after the accident. Inspectors documented missing temporary fall protection, improper site preparation, incomplete hazard documentation. Several violations carried substantial financial penalties. What happened to these citations? I asked. Rebecca turned another page. Most were settled. Quietly. She nodded. The company paid corrective penalties. What about the report? It wasn't publicized. I looked down. Marcus told me OSHA found nothing serious. Rebecca didn't answer. She didn't need to. The documents answered for her. Melissa stood and walked toward the whiteboard. So let's summarize. She wrote 4 points: incomplete safety barriers, employee warnings, video confirmation, OSHA violations. Then she turned toward me. At this point, we can reasonably demonstrate negligence. I understood the word well. Negligence didn't necessarily mean someone intended harm. It meant someone failed to act with reasonable care. As painful as that realization was, another question refused to leave my mind. If this proves negligence, I looked at Rebecca. Why hide my medical records afterward? The room fell silent again, because that was the question no one could yet answer. Marcus had every reason to fear an accident investigation, but concealing my diagnosis months later, that required a different motive. Rebecca reached into her briefcase. I wasn't planning to discuss this until tomorrow. She removed a sealed financial file. But after today's evidence, she placed it on the table. I think you're ready. Inside were bank summaries from Washington commercial builders obtained during discovery. I didn't understand most of the numbers. Revenue, payroll, vendor payments, outstanding invoices. Then Rebecca pointed to one transaction. The date was 5 days after my accident. A deposit. Nearly $2.8 million. What is that? A progress payment. For the building. Yes. It was released immediately after the insurance carrier reclassified your injury. I frowned. I don't understand, Melissa explained. Many commercial contracts require contractors to disclose serious workplace incidents. I nodded slowly. If your injuries had remained classified as catastrophic, the project could have been suspended. Exactly. Rebecca pointed again. The reclassification removed that immediate risk. I looked from the documents to Melissa, then back to Rebecca. So the timing is significant. I whispered the thought before I realized I was speaking aloud. If my injury looked less severe, the project kept moving. The payment was released. Rebecca nodded once. No conclusions yet. But the financial timing deserves investigation. I stared at the deposit amount. $2.8 million. For the first time, the pieces stopped looking like isolated mistakes. The missing reports, the canceled surgical consultation, the altered communication, the minimized diagnosis, the rush to classify my injuries as less serious. They all pointed towards something much larger than protecting my feelings. Someone had something enormous to lose, and for the first time, I was beginning to understand exactly how much money had been riding on whether anyone believed I was truly injured. For several days, I couldn't stop thinking about one number: $2.8 million. It wasn't the amount itself that haunted me, it was the timing. The payment had arrived only days after my injury was reclassified as significantly less severe. That alone didn't prove anyone had committed fraud. Large construction projects involved complicated contracts, milestone payments, insurance requirements, and dozens of moving pieces. Money changed hands constantly. but timing has a way of asking uncomfortable questions. Melissa arranged another meeting the following Monday. This time only 4 of us were present. Melissa, Rebecca Ellis, a forensic accountant named Jonathan Pierce, and me. Jonathan spread several binders across the conference table. I've spent the last week reviewing Washington commercial builders' financial records. He wasn't dramatic. He spoke the way someone would explain a tax return. Mr. Washington's company wasn't failing. I looked up. It wasn't no. It was surviving. He slid one chart toward me. The difference matters. He explained that Marcus had built a respected regional construction company over the previous decade. The business had completed schools, medical offices, municipal buildings, and several rehabilitation facilities. From the outside, everything looked successful. Inside the accounting records, however, the picture was different. 3 commercial projects had exceeded budget. Material costs had increased unexpectedly. 2 developers had delayed payments. Interest rates on business loans had climbed. Cash flow had become dangerously tight. Jonathan circled several months on the timeline. Here. I leaned closer. If one more major project stopped, he finished the sentence, the company would likely violate lending agreements. What happens then? The bank can demand immediate corrective action. And if that isn't possible, the company risks losing operating credit. I understood enough about business to realize what that meant. Payroll problems, suppliers refusing deliveries, projects shutting down, possibly bankruptcy. Jonathan continued. The medical complex where you were injured represented nearly 18% of projected annual revenue. I slowly nodded. So that project mattered. It mattered enormously. Rebecca opened another folder. This is correspondence between the project's lender and Washington commercial builders. Every page had already been highlighted. One email immediately caught my attention. Failure to disclose any material incident capable of significantly delaying project completion may constitute a violation of financing conditions. I looked at Melissa. So, if my injury had been classified as catastrophic, the lender could have requested additional review. Possibly suspended funding. Rebecca nodded. Correct. Again. Possibly. Not certainly. Nobody exaggerated the evidence. That was something I appreciated throughout the investigation. No one claimed to know more than the documents actually proved. Melissa believed facts became stronger when they weren't stretched. Jonathan pointed to another spreadsheet. After the insurance reserve was lowered, he tapped the deposit entry. The progress payment was released. The lender continued funding. The project stayed active. I stared silently at the numbers. None of that erased what had happened to me, but it finally explained why minimizing my injuries could have mattered to someone running a struggling construction company. Not because Marcus wanted me to suffer, because he believed he couldn't afford the truth. That realization hurt in an entirely different way. 3 days later, Melissa called. We've received deposition requests. For who? You. I expected that. And your parents. That surprised me. My parents. They both gave statements during the insurance review. I hadn't known that. When? Shortly after your accident. I thought back to those first weeks. Pain medication, doctor appointments, learning to walk without grimacing. While I struggled through all of that, my parents had already been speaking with insurance representatives. The deposition took place inside a conference room rather than a courtroom. No jury, no judge. Only attorneys, a court reporter, and a camera documenting every answer. I answered questions for nearly 4 hours. About my career, my injuries, my symptoms, my conversations with Marcus. Every document, every appointment, every missing report. When my deposition ended, I remained in another room while my parents arrived separately. Melissa later obtained copies of the transcripts. Reading them became one of the hardest moments of the entire case. Not because my parents lied, because they believed what they were saying. Lorraine described Marcus as a good man under impossible pressure. She described me as always emotionally strong. Then came the sentence I couldn't stop reading. I honestly believed Juniper would recover eventually, so I didn't think every medical detail needed to burden her while she was already overwhelmed. I lowered the transcript. She hadn't viewed hiding information as betrayal. She'd viewed it as protection. Protection based entirely on deciding what I deserved to know. Curtis's testimony was quieter, painfully quiet. He admitted he had questioned why my recovery kept getting worse. He admitted he wondered whether another medical opinion might help. Then one attorney asked him directly, "Did you ever ask to see your daughter's MRI?" A long pause appeared in the transcript. Finally, "No." "Why not?" "I trusted the doctors." Another pause. "And I trusted my family." I closed my eyes. My father hadn't chosen Marcus over me. He had chosen certainty over confrontation. That choice still cost me. Several days later, Rebecca requested one final interview with Lorraine. Unlike the deposition, this conversation wasn't adversarial. She simply wanted clarification. Afterward, Rebecca invited Melissa and me into her office. "I think Mrs. Washington was honest." "What did she say?" I asked. Rebecca opened her notebook. "She admitted encouraging Marcus to avoid frightening you." Melissa remained silent. Rebecca continued reading. "I told him Juniper worries too much. If every doctor starts talking about surgery immediately, she'll panic before anyone knows whether it's really necessary." I looked down. That sounded exactly like my mother, always trying to soften reality, always believing difficult truths could wait. Rebecca turned another page. "She also admitted saying something else." "What?" "Marcus has hundreds of people depending on him. Juniper only has herself." The room became very still. Melissa quietly asked, "Did she deny saying it?" "No." I whispered, "She really believed that?" Rebecca nodded gently. "I think she did." For years, my independence had been treated as proof I needed less protection, less help, less honesty, less consideration, because I always managed. Until one day, I couldn't. Melissa finally spoke. "Sometimes, the most damaging decisions aren't made by people trying to hurt someone. They're made by people convinced they're helping." I thought about that all night. My mother hadn't forged signatures. She hadn't altered medical reports. She hadn't canceled appointments. But she had helped build the reasoning that made those decisions feel acceptable. Protect Marcus. Don't upset Juniper. Everything will work out eventually. Except it hadn't. Late Friday afternoon, Melissa called again. "I've got news. The good kind." "I think so." "The judge ordered mediation." I wasn't surprised. Most civil cases never reach trial without at least attempting settlement. "When?" "Next month." "Do you think they'll settle?" Melissa leaned back in her chair. "I think Marcus wants this to disappear." "So do I." She smiled sadly. "But you want it to end with the truth." "Yes. And he wants it to end quietly." A week later, both sides met inside a downtown mediation office. Marcus looked exhausted. Older than I remembered. His attorney presented a financial settlement. Confidential. No admission of wrongdoing. No acknowledgement that my diagnosis had been concealed. Only compensation. Melissa didn't even let me answer immediately. Instead, she asked one question. Will your client acknowledge that Dr. Washington was denied access to her complete medical information? Marcus's attorney shook his head.
No.
Melissa asked another. Will your client acknowledge responsibility for the canceled surgical consultation?
Again, no.
The negotiations lasted nearly 8 hours. By evening, the mediator returned with a final update.
I'm sorry.
He folded his notebook. We've reached an impasse. No agreement, no settlement, no compromise. As we walked toward the elevator, Melissa looked at me. You understand what this means? I nodded slowly.
We're going to trial.
She pressed the lobby button.
Yes.
When the elevator doors opened, my phone vibrated. It was an email from the court. The subject line contained only 6 words. Civil trial date officially confirmed. The courthouse looked smaller than I had imagined. Maybe that was because I had spent months building it into something enormous in my mind. Or maybe it was because by then I wasn't walking into court looking for revenge. I was walking in carrying thousands of pages of evidence. Facts have a way of making even intimidating places feel manageable. Melissa met me outside the courtroom 30 minutes before proceedings began.
How are you holding up?
I've been better.
You've also been worse.
I smiled. That's true. She handed me a slim folder. These aren't new documents.
What are they?
Our timeline. Inside were only 3 pages. No legal arguments, no dramatic language, just dates. Accident, emergency room, MRI, surgical recommendation, canceled consultation, modified reports, insurance communications, recovered surveillance footage, audit logs. Every important event sat neatly on a single chronological line. Melissa tapped the first page. This case isn't about one dramatic moment.
I know.
It's about hundreds of small decisions. She was right. No single document had destroyed my trust. No single conversation had changed my life. It had been dozens of seemingly ordinary choices, each one moving me farther away from the treatment I should have received. Together they formed something impossible to ignore. The courtroom itself felt quieter than television had led me to expect. There were no emotional outbursts, no surprise witnesses bursting through the doors. Only attorneys organizing files, court staff preparing exhibits, and jurors taking their seats with polite curiosity. Marcus sat at the opposite table. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. I returned it. Whatever had happened between us, he was still my brother. Nothing could erase that. But neither could it erase what had followed my accident. The judge entered. Opening statements began. Marcus's attorney stood first. He never argued that I hadn't been injured. Instead, he presented a much narrower argument. This case is a tragic accident followed by unfortunate administrative confusion. Administrative confusion. Melissa wrote the phrase onto her legal pad. Then she stood. Our evidence will show that confusion does not repeatedly point in the same direction. She paused. It always resulted in less information reaching Dr. Juniper Washington. Another pause.
Not more.
That single sentence quietly reframed the entire case. Over the next 3 days, witnesses testified one after another. Construction employees described the unfinished safety barriers. OSHA representatives explained inspection procedures. Hospital administrators outlined record management systems. Rebecca Ellis carefully walked the jury through the insurance timeline. She never accused Marcus of fraud. She simply explained what each document demonstrated. This email redirected communication. This authorization changed delivery preferences. This audit log recorded access. This financial record established timing. One fact, then another, then another. By themselves, each document appeared ordinary, Together, they formed a pattern. Melissa intentionally avoided exaggeration. Whenever opposing counsel objected, she calmly returned to the documents. "Let's read the record." That became her favorite sentence. The jury noticed. So did I. On the fourth morning, Daniel Ross testified. He explained hospital audit systems in plain English. If someone accesses a patient record, he looked toward the jury.
The computer records who entered when they entered what they viewed and whether anything was changed.
Melissa asked, "Can audit systems determine motive?" No. What can they determine? Activity. And was activity present in Dr. Washington's records? Yes. He displayed a simplified timeline on a monitor. Original authorization, replacement authorization, communication preference update, appointment cancellation. Every action appeared with precise timestamps. Marcus's attorney stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Ross, can you state with certainty who physically typed every entry?" No. "So administrative staff could have completed some requests?" Yes. "Without Mr. Washington personally touching a keyboard?" Potentially. Marcus's attorney looked satisfied. Melissa remained completely still. She had expected that answer. During redirect examination, she asked only one question. Regardless of who typed the entries. Daniel nodded. "Did every authorization originate through Washington Commercial Builders' insurance claim?" Yes. No further questions. The jury quietly took notes. The next witness surprised everyone. My father. Curtis Washington walked slowly to their witness stand. He looked older than he had only months earlier. When Melissa approached him, her voice softened. "Mr. Washington." "Yes." "Do you love your daughter?" He didn't hesitate. "More than she'll probably ever know." The courtroom became silent. "Do you love your son?" "Yes." "Did you want either of them harmed?" "Never." Melissa nodded. "I believe you." Then came the difficult question. "When did you first realize something wasn't right?" My father looked toward me, not for permission, not for reassurance, simply because fathers instinctively look for their children when answering painful questions. "I think," he swallowed, "about 4 months after the accident." "What made you think that?" "Juniper kept getting worse." "Did that concern you?" "Very much." "What did you do?" Another long pause. "I asked Marcus whether the doctors were missing something." "And what did he say?" "He told me specialists weren't worried." "Were you satisfied with that answer?" "No." "Then why didn't you ask to see your daughter's medical records yourself?" The silence stretched several seconds. Finally, "Because I wanted to believe my family was telling me the truth." Melissa let those words remain in the room. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush forward. Sometimes silence carries more weight than another question. Marcus's attorney declined to cross-examine him for long. There wasn't much to challenge. My father's testimony wasn't about assigning blame. It was about acknowledging regret. By the end of the week, the defense's explanation remained essentially unchanged. No one intentionally tried to harm Juniper. Administrative mistakes happened. Communication became complicated. Insurance procedures were confusing. Marcus himself eventually testified. He looked directly at the jury. "I never wanted my sister to suffer." For the first time since the trial began, I believed him. Not because it excused anything, because I thought it was true. Melissa approached him carefully. "Mr. Washington?" "Yes. When construction workers warned you that safety barriers were incomplete, I believed the area was safe. When your sister's medical reports changed, I relied on professionals. When appointments were canceled, I assumed someone had spoken with Juniper." Every answer contained the same theme: assumption, reliance, misunderstanding. Melissa never raised her voice. Instead, she walked toward the evidence table. She lifted a thick binder. "Mr. Washington," she opened it slowly.
Would you agree that assumptions become dangerous when they replace verification?
Marcus looked down.
I suppose. No further questions.
He returned to his seat looking visibly shaken, not because Melissa had embarrassed him, because she had reduced months of explanations to one uncomfortable reality. No one had verified whether I actually knew the truth. Late that afternoon, the judge reviewed the witness schedule. Only one major medical witness remained. Dr. Emily Chen, the orthopedic spine surgeon. Melissa organized several large exhibit boards against the courtroom wall. Each remained covered with protective cloth. I knew exactly what was underneath: the original MRI scans, the same images she had placed on the light board during the family meeting that changed everything. The judge looked toward both legal teams. "Dr. Chen will testify first thing tomorrow morning." Melissa nodded.
"So ordered, Your Honor."
As court adjourned, I gathered my notebook. Walking past the evidence boards, I paused for just a moment. Tomorrow, 12 strangers would finally see the images that should have changed my treatment nearly a year earlier. And for the first time, the truth would no longer be hidden inside confidential medical files. It would be displayed where no one could pretend not to see it. I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual the next morning, not because I was nervous, because I wanted a few quiet minutes before the courtroom filled with attorneys, reporters, and spectators. For nearly a year, those MRI images had existed in two different realities. In one reality, they were simply medical records stored inside a hospital database. In the other, they represented every decision that had been taken away from me. Today, those two realities would finally become one. Melissa found me standing outside the courtroom windows.
"You ready?" "I think so."
She studied my face for a moment. "Remember something."
"What?"
"Today's testimony isn't about proving you're in pain."
"I know."
"It's about proving what information existed and when." That distinction mattered. Pain could be debated, medical opinions could differ, but dates couldn't argue with one another. Neither could original records. At exactly 9 o'clock, Dr. Emily Chen took the witness stand. She wore the same calm expression I'd seen the first day we met. The oath was administered. Melissa approached.
"Please introduce yourself to the jury."
"My name is Dr. Emily Chen." She summarized her Education Fellowship Training Board certifications and nearly 2 decades of experience treating spinal injuries. No one challenged her qualifications. Melissa displayed the first exhibit, the original MRI. This image was taken the evening of Dr. Juniper Washington's accident.
"Yes. Have you reviewed the complete imaging file?"
"I have." "Did you also review the reports eventually provided to Dr. Washington?"
"Yes."
Melissa paused. "Are they identical?"
"No."
The answer landed quietly. No theatrics, no dramatic pause, just one clear word. Melissa continued. "Doctor, could you explain the original MRI in language the jury can easily understand?" Dr. Chen stood and walked toward the illuminated display. She pointed to several areas without rushing. "This portion shows significant damage to the supporting structures of the lower spine." She moved slightly lower. "Here we see compression affecting nerve tissue." Then another image appeared. "This combination of findings is important because instability and neurological symptoms often worsen without timely intervention." Melissa asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Based on these original images, what treatment would normally have been recommended?" "Urgent evaluation by a spine surgeon." "Was that recommendation documented?"
"Yes."
Melissa displayed the consultation request. The jury examined it carefully.
Would conservative therapy alone have been considered sufficient? Dr. Chen answered carefully. Not based solely on these findings. Marcus's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. The judge looked toward Dr. Chen. You may answer within a reasonable degree of medical certainty. Dr. Chen nodded. Based upon the imaging neurological symptoms and documented findings, I would have expected expedited surgical consultation. Melissa nodded once. No further questions. Cross-examination began. Marcus's attorney approached slowly. Dr. Chen, yes. Medicine isn't always absolute, is it? No. Different physicians sometimes recommend different treatments. They do. So another surgeon might have chosen continued observation. In some cases, he smiled slightly, so surgery was never guaranteed. Dr. Chen remained composed. Neither was permanent disability. The courtroom became completely silent. She continued before anyone interrupted. Medicine involves probabilities. Can early treatment improve outcomes? Often. Can delayed treatment reduce available options? Yes. In Dr. Washington's case, she looked briefly toward the MRI. Time mattered. The attorney thanked her and returned to his seat. No further questions. Melissa requested permission to publish the remaining exhibits. The judge approved. One after another, the jury viewed the timeline. Original MRI, original report, surgical recommendation, canceled consultation, replacement report, authorization changes, audit logs, insurance communications, surveillance footage, financial records. Instead of overwhelming the jury with technical language, Melissa connected each document with a single sentence. This report existed. This appointment was scheduled. This appointment was canceled. This communication changed. This recommendation never reached Dr. Washington. Simple, clear, undeniable. By the end of the presentation, every juror had filled several pages of notes. Closing arguments began the following morning. Marcus's attorney stood first. He acknowledged mistakes, administrative failures, poor communication. He reminded the jury that Marcus loved his sister. He insisted no evidence showed anyone wanted Juniper permanently injured. Listening to him, I realized something important. I actually agreed with part of his argument. I didn't believe Marcus had wanted me disabled. That had never been the real issue. Melissa stood for the final argument. She walked slowly toward the evidence table. Ladies and gentlemen, she lifted the original MRI report. This document existed. She placed it beside the consultation recommendation. This recommendation existed. Then she placed the appointment notice beside them. This appointment existed. Finally, she added the canceled scheduling record. So did this. She looked toward the jury. This case does not ask you to determine whether accidents happen. They do. It does not ask you to determine whether families sometimes make mistakes. They do. She paused. It asks something much simpler. Who lost the opportunity to make informed medical decisions? The courtroom remained perfectly still. Melissa continued. Dr. Juniper Washington. She pointed gently toward me. She never had the chance to decide whether she wanted immediate surgery. She never had the chance to seek another opinion. She never had the chance to question recommendations she never received. Those choices belonged to her. They belonged to no one else. Then she quietly returned to counsel table. No dramatic finish, no raised voice, nothing more needed to be said. The jury deliberated for nearly 6 hours. Those hours felt longer than the previous 11 months. Late that afternoon, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed the verdict form to the judge. He reviewed it silently, then looked up. On the claim of negligence. He read the jury's finding in my favor. My breathing became shallow. On the claim involving interference with Dr. Washington's access to medical information, again, the verdict favored me. The court awarded substantial compensatory damages to cover future medical treatment, lost earning capacity, ongoing rehabilitation, and pain caused by the delayed diagnosis. But strangely, the amount wasn't the first thing I heard. What stayed with me was the judge's next statement. The evidence establishes that Dr. Washington was deprived of timely access to critical medical information necessary for informed treatment decisions. One sentence. That was all. For almost a year, I had questioned my memory, my judgment, my resilience. Now an official court record recognized what I had known deep inside, but had struggled to trust. I hadn't imagined any of it. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited near the entrance. Melissa asked whether I wanted to make a statement. I thought for a moment, then nodded. I stepped toward the microphones. I don't believe every family disagreement belongs in court. The crowd grew quiet. But every patient deserves access to their own medical information. No one should have to wonder whether important decisions were made without their knowledge. I thanked the court. I thanked the medical professionals who had respected the evidence. Then I left without answering further questions. Across the street, I noticed Marcus standing alone beside his attorney. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, he looked up. There was no anger in his face anymore, only exhaustion and regret, and the painful understanding that some consequences cannot be negotiated away. A week later, after life had begun settling into something resembling normal again, my receptionist knocked softly on my office door. Juniper. Yes. There's someone outside asking if you'll see her. Who is it? The receptionist hesitated. It's your mother. I looked through the glass wall of my office before answering. My mother was sitting alone in the reception area. Lorraine Washington had always carried herself with quiet confidence. Even after retiring as an elementary school principal, she had a habit of sitting perfectly upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, as though every room she entered deserved order. That afternoon, she looked different. Older, smaller. She wasn't reading one of the magazines on the coffee table. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was simply staring at the floor. I turned back to my receptionist. Please tell her I'll be out in a minute. When I stepped into the reception area, Lorraine stood immediately. Thank you for seeing me. Let's go somewhere private. Instead of using my office, I led her into one of our consultation rooms. It felt more appropriate. Patients came into those rooms to have honest conversations about difficult realities. Maybe it was time for us to do the same. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I've practiced this conversation 100 times. I imagine you have. But now that I'm here, she shook her head. None of those words seem good enough. I waited. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to make the conversation easier for someone else. Lorraine looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. You do. I kept telling myself I was protecting the family. Her eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't protecting the family. She looked down at her hands. I was protecting the version of our family that existed in my own mind. I remained quiet. She continued. When your father and I were raising you and Marcus, I always believed keeping everyone together was the most important responsibility I had. I know. When Marcus started having business problems, she stopped again. I panicked. I know that now. I kept thinking, she smiled sadly through her tears. Juniper has always been strong. I nodded slowly. You said that many times. I thought your strength meant you could survive one more disappointment. She covered her face briefly.
I never stopped to ask whether you should have been carrying it. That sentence hurt more than almost anything else she had said, because it was true. Strength had become the excuse people used whenever they expected more from me than they expected from anyone else. Eventually, Lorraine looked up again. I don't expect forgiveness. I've already forgiven you. She blinked. You have? I had to. Why? Because carrying anger every day was becoming another injury. She reached toward me instinctively, then stopped herself before our hands touched. But I finished the sentence for her. Forgiveness isn't the same as restoring trust. She slowly nodded. I understand. I don't hate you. I know. But our relationship can't go back to what it was. I know. There was sadness in her eyes, but there was also acceptance. For the first time, she wasn't trying to negotiate. She wasn't asking me to make everyone comfortable again. She was simply listening. A week later, my father visited the clinic. Unlike my mother, he didn't arrive with prepared words. He carried a small cardboard box. I found these while cleaning the garage. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Family vacations, birthday parties, my college graduation, Marcus teaching me to ride a bicycle, me helping him build a treehouse. For nearly an hour, we quietly looked through them together. Finally, Curtis spoke. I've been thinking about something. What? The day you were born. I smiled faintly. I don't remember much about that. He laughed softly. I remember every minute. He picked up one photograph. When the nurse placed you in my arms, his voice cracked. I promised I'd always protect you. He looked away. I failed. I reached across the table. You did. He nodded. I know. But, he looked back at me. You're here now. So am I. Neither of us pretended the past could be erased, but unlike before, neither of us hid from it either. Marcus didn't contact me for almost 3 months. Then one afternoon I received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text message. A letter. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend himself. He didn't blame stress, business pressure, or anyone else. He wrote only what he believed he should have said a year earlier. June, I kept telling myself I was buying time. 1 more week, 1 more report, 1 more payment. I convinced myself I'd fix everything before you ever discovered how much had been hidden. Instead, every decision made the next one easier. I never meant to choose my company over my sister. But intentions don't erase outcomes. I'm sorry for every choice that took away your ability to choose for yourself. You don't owe me another conversation. I only wanted you to hear those words from me, not through attorneys. Love, Marcus. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a drawer. Not because everything was healed, because it deserved to remain exactly what it was. An apology, not a request. The lawsuit allowed me to renovate my rehabilitation clinic. That surprised many people. Some assumed I would move away. Others expected me to retire early. Instead, I invested nearly everything back into the work I loved. We expanded our neurological rehabilitation program. We hired additional therapists. We created free monthly workshops teaching injured workers how to understand insurance claims request, complete medical records, and ask informed questions before signing documents. I never mentioned my own lawsuit during those seminars. I didn't need to. The information mattered regardless of who was teaching it. One afternoon, a young warehouse employee attended one of the workshops. He couldn't have been older than 24. Near the end of the session, he stayed behind. My supervisor says I should just trust the paperwork. I smiled gently. You should absolutely trust good professionals. He looked confused. But trust doesn't replace understanding. He nodded slowly. So it's okay if I ask for everything. I walked over to the filing cabinet beside my desk. Inside the top drawer was a single framed image, my original MRI. Not because I wanted to relive the worst day of my life, because it reminded me of something I never wanted to forget. Evidence gave me back my voice when doubt almost convinced me to surrender it. I looked back at the young man. Yes, I smiled. It's more than okay. It's your right. He thanked me and quietly left. After the clinic closed that evening, I stood alone in my office for a few minutes. Outside, the parking lot slowly emptied as the sun dipped below the trees. My back still hurt on cold mornings. Some nerve damage would never completely disappear. There were days I still moved more carefully than I once had. Healing hadn't erased the consequences. It had simply taught me how to build a meaningful life around them. People sometimes ask whether I regret taking my family to court. The honest answer is no. I regret that the truth ever needed a courtroom. What I don't regret is choosing to protect myself once I understood that no one else could do it for me. I learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are promises we make to ourselves about what we will no longer accept. Forgiveness can exist without restored access. Love can exist without blind trust. And evidence, when treated with patience and integrity, has a quiet way of speaking louder than denial ever can. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by strangers. They're caused by the people we love who believe they know what's best for us without asking what we need. If you've ever been told to stay quiet to avoid making trouble or to sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of keeping peace in the family, I hope this story reminds you that your voice matters. Setting healthy boundaries is not an act of revenge. It's an act of self-respect. Forgiveness is a personal choice, but it does not require reopening every door that once led to pain. You can wish someone well while still protecting your future. You can let go of resentment without giving away your right to make your own decisions. Healing often begins the moment we stop waiting for everyone else to validate our experiences and start trusting the evidence, our instincts, and the people who earn our trust through honesty. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between protecting a family relationship and protecting yourself? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who feels alone. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family resilience, justice, and healing, consider subscribing for more. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.